Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. It's so great to see so many people here. In talking with some folks who came in through the lobby, some are here because you know who Solas Nua is, and some are here because you were at SPX this weekend. So for those of you who don't know what SPX is, it's a Small Press Expo. It took place this weekend. It's where Luke was signing copies of his new novel and speaking on a panel. And for those of you that are new to Solas Nua means new light in Irish. We're a nonprofit here in DC, and we specialize in bringing contemporary Irish arts to DC. And that's film, theater, music, dance, literature, and even graphic novels. We're thrilled to have Luke in town. Luke's book, The Con Artist, which many of you got a copy of, was our 2024 book day book that we hand out on St. Patrick's Day. Every year, Solas Nua gives out free Irish literature on St. Patrick's Day, as many books that we can put in the hands of people as possible. New contemporary work for people for free on St. Patrick's Day. And who makes that possible? Well, Dennis and Mimi, thank you. And I want to say thank you as well. Hi, I'm Andrew, the executive director of Solas Nua, and this was my first book day. And they had the faith in me to follow my idea that how about for literature, we do a graphic novel this year. And so that's why we are able to bring Luke Healy here. We're able to do this event based on a few partnerships first. We're able to be here in the beautiful NYU DC. Because they host us and they support our events. So thank you for letting us be here. Also, the Georgetown Global Irish Studies Program, they're another longtime partner. The copy of The Con Artist, the only way that we were able to give that out is through a partnership with the publisher, Drawn and Quarterly. And so thank you, Drawn and Quarterly, for that. And a special thank you to Culture Ireland. Culture Ireland pays for Irish artists to come on tour to the United States to share their work with us. So thank you, Culture Ireland. So Solas Nua does free events like this year round. So if you like this event, we have another free event 2 weeks from now, an experimental live performance and video art installation happening near DuPont Circle at Mad Hatter. That'll be September 27th. And then we have an amazing double bill of interactive and experimental theater performance coming up in November. It's going to be really exciting. One of the pieces is going to be VR, and the other is a wild audio experience. So please do check it out. So I want to now introduce our guests. Jacob Shapiro has been working in the comic industry for 10 years. He's worked with publishers No Brow and Mysterious Press, as well as New York City's iconic Strand bookstore. Jacob is the co-owner and manager of Phantom Comics, which is just in DuPont Circle. It's an Eisner Award-nominated bookstore, and Phantom focuses on community building in the local art scene through workshops, artist talks, and other events. So like, for example, in October, they have an event every single day in October. And I go to Phantom once a month because it is my 7-year-old son's favorite store to go to. He also works, he serves on the organizing committee of the DC Zine Fest. Luke Healy was born and raised in Dublin, where he got a BA in journalism and an MFA from the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. His most recent book is Self-Esteem at the End of the World, and he's also published 4 other graphic novels, The Con Artist, Americana, How to Survive in the North, and Permanent Press. Luke's work has been exhibited in the Museum of Comics and Cartoon Art in Manhattan, and his clients include The New Yorker, BBC, Vice, and A24. His books have been translated into 5 languages and have been named best of their years by the publications like The Guardian, Publishers Weekly, The Washington Post, The Irish Examiner, and more. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Jacob and Luke.
Thanks everybody for coming as well at the start, but we'll keep saying it. Hi, Jacob.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Andrew, for reaching out and help making this happen. Luke, you do a lot of different stuff. I know that you've done some comedy in the past. You've done a lot of different, you partake in all sorts of different media.
Yeah, the sort of two strands of my career really are I do comic books, and then I teach improv comedy. So that's like the other kind of part of my world. So I do a lot of stand up and improv as well. Yeah. And
So-
I like it.
I think most people love comedy, but I think comics can be a little more niche sometimes as a medium. Can you talk about how do you get into comics originally, and what's the connection between these two different sides of your artistry?
So I think they're so similar actually, which is really, and I'll go on at length if you let me, so cut me off. But I got into comics, I grew up in Ireland, and the comics I read as a kid were like the Beano and the Dandy. I don't know if anyone's familiar with those, but they're like really old school. I think they still publish the Beano.
Yeah, the current Beano artist is Shannon Gallant, who lives in DC, comes to Phantom all the time.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
But they're like kind of were like a gag, like magazines for kids. And so I grew up reading those, but I got really into comics when I was a teenager, and like web comics were kind of a new thing, and they were getting more and more popular when I was in school. And I read a lot of those, and that sort of exposed me to a different side of comics. When people were making web comics, it was all self-publishing. And so people felt really free to make comics about whatever they wanted. And so I read lots of web comics, and then trained to be a journalist, which I hated and was very bad at. Like I was a gossip columnist. And so I was like in Dublin, like writing about Kim Kardashian, which was like insane and made no sense because I couldn't report on Kim Kardashian's life. So I was like taking articles from the Associated Press wire and like rewriting them into my own words. And they were a hit. But I hated it. I was really bad at it. I was too anxious to be a reporter. And the one thing I always liked doing was making comic books with my friends. And so one day, I just started Googling like cartoon college degrees because I wanted to I hadn't really any experience, and I wanted to pursue like kind of a formal education. And then the big thing was like I was still studying journalism at the time. And in Ireland, like your first college degree is basically free, like your first university degree, which is incredible. But if you stop doing it, you don't get a second one for free. Like you can't change. So I knew that if I wanted to pivot in my career, I'd have to like justify it to my parents. And so I was like, I should go to university to do comic books. And yeah.
Was it easy to convince them?
No, no. I love my parents, and they're very supportive now, but they both come from really like working class families, and a career in the arts was not something that they ever kind of endorsed, I guess. Like they always wanted me to have like a real job or whatever. But I think they just saw how bad I was at being a journalist. And I got a scholarship to go to the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. And I think when they saw that I kind of that I had a little something, that they kind of started supporting it more.
Are there any other Irish students when you were at Center for Cartoon Studies?
No. I don't think there's ever been another one since. Maybe, but I don't think so. In my year there were 3 international students. There was somebody from Australia, somebody from Brazil, and myself. And I think because it was so difficult for all 3 of us to get in and to move to the United States, we all ended up being like extremely focused, and it would just be like the 3 of us in a studio at like midnight being like, we have to draw, we gotta justify this, we spent so much money to come here. Yeah.
But then after you graduated, you moved to London after that?
Yeah, I live in London now. Yeah.
So I mean, can you speak on, I don't know, the Dublin comic scene at all, do you feel like growing up there has affected the way that you look at comics at all, or art in general?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, the Dublin comic scene right now it's small, but there's great people. And there's sort of like a bigger community that's starting to organize there now, which is really nice. There's a comic book shop that opened maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, and they run like festivals, and it's probably similar to the events that Phantom does.
I know Big Bang Comics in Dublin.
Big Bang is good.
Yeah.
The one I'm talking about is called Little Deer, and they're like more in the like independent.
Oh, that's very
like
cool.
graphic. Yeah, they're amazing. But when I was a teenager, like there wasn't really a lot of Irish comics. But there was one cartoonist called Bob Byrne, and he self-published like little tiny pamphlet comics that he would just put around the city. And so when I was a teenager going into Dublin for the first time, like you just had to go around to like record shops and like see if they had a new one. And I thought that was like extremely punk and like very cool. And they were just like fart jokes and stuff, but they were really good fart jokes. And also, this might be a slightly off-color anecdote, but I was once getting an ultrasound, and the ultrasound technician and I were like chatting, making small talk, and she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Oh, I'm a cartoonist." She said, "Do you know Bob Byrne?" It's like, "Oh, I don't know him personally, but his work has meant so much to me. Like, I really, really love him, and like, I think he's amazing. Such a big, huge influence." And I went on for like 5 minutes, and when I finished, she said, "Yeah, well, he was my ex-boyfriend. He broke my heart."
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I had to sit there. And also, it was a testicular ultrasound. So I was sitting there for like 10 more minutes being like, oh my God. Like, and she was so mad at me. What was I supposed to, like, she was expecting me to like slam him or something? I don't know. It was very intimate and weird. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So if anyone can get those test results, I never went back to get them. So hopefully everything's okay.
Don't meet your idols or your idols' exes, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are there a lot of other Irish expats in London doing comics?
Not so many, really. I mean, there's a couple. And people sometimes like come to London. Like London, a lot of creative people from Ireland end up there for a few years and then end up going back to Ireland. So there's been a few of those. But there's like a handful of people in Ireland right now who are doing really cool, interesting stuff. And I would love to see more people like check out their work. And an Irish cartoonist called Sarah Bowie actually just had a book that was like a big hit in the UK, which is amazing. It's like a kid's book called Nina Peanut is amazing, and it's a great book. So I highly recommend.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, speaking of personal anecdotes, it seems like you always put a decent amount of yourself into your comics.
Too much, maybe.
And this newest one is I don't know if you could call it autobiographical. I mean, it is semi-autobiographical, I guess. Would you call it a memoir? I don't know.
No. I think when I started working on it, so for people who haven't read the book, this book, it basically
Self-Esteem and the End of the World.
Yeah, tell your friends. But it takes place from, the character is called Luke Healy. It takes place from when he's age 30 up to age 45 in like 4 sections. And so I was 30 when I wrote it. And so it sort of was me like imagining like a future life. But when I started working on it, I was reading a lot about, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her, Sarah something. I'm blanking on her last name, but she's a British artist whose medium is like self-portraiture. And her whole thing is like, she dresses up in costumes and, it's like in the fine art world, and she takes photographs of herself. And I was reading about her and I thought she was amazing. And I thought that it could be quite cool to do like a self-portrait in like my medium, which is like a comic book that's like full of really stupid jokes about like, I don't know, about being neurotic. And so the kind of idea behind it was, when I started, is I wanted to make a book that was like a self-portrait. Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. You and I originally met when you were putting out Americana in 2019, which is a comic about you doing a through hike, a long distance hike.
Yeah.
And then I can't help but notice that there is still a decent amount of hiking in this one.
Yeah. I love hiking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I mean, but you've been kind of putting yourself into all of your books. How do you get from Americana to The Con Artist, the one that everyone here has received for free, to this one?
Yeah, so I guess I had so my first book was, it's called How to Survive in the North, and it's like a nonfiction book, mostly about like Arctic castaways. And for that one, I was still kind of in journalist mode, and I did a lot of research on these true stories, and I like read their diaries and stuff. And I made the book about these people, And then I had like a big crisis of like, who am I to write somebody else's like life story? Even if I've read their diaries, it's so voyeuristic, and I like really panicked about it. I still like that book. I think I'm happy with it. But after that, I decided that I wanted to make work that was about me, because I felt like if I come across really badly, like at least it's just me. Like I haven't slandered anybody else. And so I did a kind of a couple of shorter things, but Americana was my first like memoir. And that is like a 100% true, like to the best of my ability, like recount of that long hike I went on. And then the con artists, it's like billed as fiction because a couple of things are changed, and it kind of has a like element of like, oh, what is true, what is not in it. But you know, for the people in the room, like it's all true. Everything in it happened exactly as it happens in the book. But it's about in real life, this stuff happened with my brother. I found out that he was like stealing iPads as his job, which is like not a job. That's a crime. That was his crime. But I sort of disguised that, and then like a couple of very minor details were changed. And I think my journalism background, like if I change anything, like if I cut a person out of a scene, whatever, for me that has to be classified as fiction. And then for Self-Esteem and the End of the World, I just wanted to do something that was completely fictional and just sort of like a little bit, I wouldn't say it's like a goofy book exactly, but it's like maybe a bit more explicitly comedic than what I've done before. Or at least, you know, I tried, even though it's about like sad, weird stuff. I just wanted a book where I could put lots of jokes in it, basically.
I mean, there's a lot of jokes in it. It's still a pretty sad book to me.
I mean, it's about like death and regret and like being stuck in your life or whatever. But you know, there's some jokes.
Well, it's when we were in the green room earlier, we talked a little bit about the years since 2020. It seems like a lot of what you're going through in this book is dealing with a lot of your anxieties about yourself, about your career, and about the world at large. And it's kind of very vulnerable, but also intensely relatable. I think a lot of other people have gone through it some tough times in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And can relate to it. But then the fact that it starts off feeling like a regular memoir comic, but then it keeps jumping 5 years into the future to this imagined version of your future life. And in some ways where it works out how you would want it to, but then in other ways it still doesn't. It almost, you know, I think for a lot of people when they're in, you know, peak quarantine times, all you're doing is playing in your head, like, how is, you know, what are the next 5 years of my life even going to look like?
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that, you know, if COVID hadn't happened, do you think you would have made this book the same way?
No, I don't think so. I mean, so in the book, like the kind of advancing threat throughout is climate change, but it's really a stand-in for COVID, or it's a stand-in for like anxieties about the future. So like I was saying in the green room, like there's a chapter in the book where the characters get trapped in a hotel because there's like a big rainstorm, and in the UK in 5 years in the future, they've instituted like rainfall lockdowns because the storms are so severe. And that obviously is like a stand-in for a COVID lockdown. But I think like the book really is it's about me reflecting on how I like deal with change, basically. Because in the book, like the character doesn't really change over the course of the book. He's kind of always the same. But like the world changes around him dramatically. And I think that, you know, when I was thinking of it as like a kind of self-portrait, I was reflecting on like how hard of a time I was having, but I kept a diary, and in the diary, like every day, I read this article that was about like how you should write about yourself in the third person in diaries because it makes you look more empathetic or whatever. And I kept writing in it every day like Luke Healy is lucky, because that is really what I felt, even though things were really like I had a really, really rough like lockdown period. Like a bunch of people in my family got really sick. And it was like a disaster, basically. That same brother started stealing other stuff. So it was really tricky. But I just the whole time was like, well, I just feel like a really lucky person. And so the book is about like kind of like horrible things happening to the character, but he's kind of like stoic about it, I guess. Mostly, he has a couple of like moments of breakdown. But the kind of the kind of message in the book is like that everything is always changing all the time. So we might as well just try to be okay with it.
Well, one of the things that happens in the book, which I guess is a minor spoiler, but I want to talk about the book a little bit, is in the story, one of your older comics gets turned into a movie, and it's kind of about you dealing with the experience of getting your comic turned into a movie. And so that I guess it's sort of a be careful what you wish for thing, because the thing you wanted finally comes, but then it turns out not exactly how you'd imagined it.
Yeah.
Was that an idea that you had percolating in your mind before? I don't know.
Yeah, so that section of the book is I made that first. So that's the kind of the last quarter of the book is about this movie getting made. And I made that as like a standalone thing a couple of years ago. And it was like it was in 2018 or 2019, so it was like very peak superhero movie time. Like the Avengers, like the really big ones were just kind of coming out and people were going crazy. And I thought it would just be like really funny and silly to make a comic that's about like one of my like indie like comics that's just about people kind of being sad and like thinking about things got made into like a blockbuster film with like huge sets and special effects and stuff. And so it started off as kind of like a silly thing. But then I think a lot of when I started getting into this idea of doing a longer book that was kind of like a self-portrait, I realized that that book kind of was that short story was that already, and so I wanted to like get into that. But yeah, I really like DVD extras. So anything behind the scenes of a film, I'm like I love it. So yeah,
Oh,
that's why I did that.
that's very cool. I mean, I think about movies in relation to comics a lot.
Mm.
You know, people love turning comics into movies. There's so many people who make comics who, they sell the movie rights to the comic sometimes even before the book is released.
Yeah.
And that there definitely are people in comics that they couldn't get their movie made, but if they get the comic made, then they can eventually turn it, that's just the storyboards for their movie.
Yeah.
And as a comics person, it's always frustrated me a bit to have our medium exist kind of at the service of another medium of art.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, do you think about cinematic quality in your comics at all? I mean, even when people talk about visual storytelling in comics, sometimes they'll use film language for talking about the way that paneling works and
Yeah,
stuff
people
like
talk
that.
about like the camera in a
Yeah.
comic all the time, which I think is really interesting. Which I get. I get that that's an easy way to like think about it because people are more familiar with film language. Like when I was teaching a comics course in Denmark earlier this
Ooh.
year. Yeah, it was
Just casual.
Denmark's really nice. Also,
Love Copenhagen.
love that place. But in it just was. I found it even myself as somebody who has like studied comics for a long time easier to just be like, it's a medium shot or whatever. It's like a shot. Like there's no camera. Like why are we saying a shot? But I think that my comics like they're much more influenced by TV than film. So like the kind of visual language of film is not something that I'm not like talented enough of a visual like stylist to do anything extreme. So a lot of my comics look kind of like sitcoms or something where there's like a very flat backdrop as though it's characters like moving around a stage. And I did comics early on that were like about like theater productions. And I have like in my book Permanent Press, there's like a whole section of it that's about a play being made. And so I got really into drawing everything like super flat. Which is occasionally people ask if I like love Wes Anderson or something because it has that kind of like flat thing going on. But comics, they're like so their own thing. And they're so I think that they're a visual medium, so they get compared to like film and TV a lot. But I think, they're not film in the same way that they're not like a novel. Like, they're not like a prose novel and they're not poetry. Like they're so their own thing and they take from everything. And I think it is nice to pull from all of that. But it would be cool. Like I think when people talk about making comics, they often list films as their influence, but they're never like, yeah, I'm really into like Dostoevsky or something, like so it's not I think it's nice to just pull from everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. Speaking of I don't know, your draftsmanship, the way that you approach the visuals, can you talk about how you came to your visual style for this? Because it seems after spending a lot of time with Americana when that was coming out, I think about this as feeling like a natural progression of your art style. You got this really distinct, like two-tone. You've got a blue and a kind of orangey red, and that's it. And then I've always really appreciated the way you do your lettering with the serif letters. Is it It's all digitally lettered?
It
How's
is, yeah. So
Yeah.
I did the lettering in my first 2 books by hand.
Yeah,
And really injured my hand.
yeah,
Because I was drawing like tiny letters. And my second book was about that book about the play that I mentioned. And there's tons of like play script in it.
yeah.
And I like hand lettered all of that and like really injured my hand. So after that, I was like, never again. Like I can't do it. So I made it fun.
Yeah. So what about the way you do the colors in this?
So the colors, the way I like to do the colors in my books, I call it like coloring compositionally. I don't really know if that's an accurate way to describe it, but I think that color can be used to draw the reader's attention to like where you want it to go in comics. And I think that's like an underutilized like compositional tool, because my artwork, you know, it's sort of it like toes the line between being minimalist and then being like a little busy. I think there's like lots of marks in the panels. And so sometimes I'm like, I want this moment to like really I want you to feel the character. I want you to feel it like pause. And so to have them be like bright pink in just a sea of blue, like there's no like literal coloring in the book really. It's all this kind of like impressionistic thing. And I wanted to do that because I think it just like, at the end of the day, like comics, one of the big things about the art in them is that you don't really look at it the same way you look at like a painting. You read it. Comics is like writing with pictures. Sometimes people say that. And I think that anything you can do to make it more legible is like, it's just so beneficial. And I think when I teach comics, a big thing I'm always saying to people is like, people are reading this. Like they're not just reading the words and then looking at the pictures, they're reading the pictures. And so using like symbols, like simplifying things down, it's just, it makes it easy to read, because when you look at a comic, your brain takes in the pictures and the words at the same time. And so having everything be as like legible and clear as possible is like the only way to do it, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so much of your storytelling is through like characters' facial reactions, things like little kind of subtle moments, kind of emotional beat to beat things. Since it's not the Avengers, but you're able to capture that. I mean, you draw yourself a lot in your comics.
Yeah.
And then in this, you even draw like future versions of yourself.
Yeah.
How do you come to the version of yourself that you draw, and has it changed much since you first started doing comics with yourself in them?
A little bit. I think when I first started putting myself into comics, I was drawing things much more detailed. I think that's often a track that cartoonists go down, is their early work is like too detailed and then they end up simplifying everything. But when I first went to the Center for Cartoon Studies, the first assignment they give you is they make you recreate a classic comic strip. And a strip that everyone got assigned one, and the strip that I got assigned was Nancy by Ernie Bushmiller.
Hey,
which is like everybody loves Nancy. Like I was at SPX, and the one universal constant that every cartoonist shares is everybody loves Nancy.
yeah, people are very excited about
it's
Nancy
so
this year.
good. But it's like a corny like dad joke comic from the 50s, but every cartoonist is like, this rules. Like it's so good.
Yeah,
And so I had to draw myself in the style of Ernie Bushmiller.
yeah.
And he drew these like very simple, like the faces are almost like emojis or something. They're like dot eyes. And so I drew myself like Nancy, and then I just couldn't stop. And so when I draw myself, like the two eyes are just like horizontal lines, the nose is a horizontal line, and the mouth is a horizontal line. So it's very easy to draw a picture of me. It's just 4 lines.
I mean, that must feel nice when it finally clicks with you what your visual shorthand for yourself is going to be.
Yeah, and I think like it has a little bit changed over time. Like my first book was like a kind of a pastiche of Tintin, because it was an adventure story about like Arctic castaways. But I think that more and more, I feel like when I draw it, it just feels like easy to just draw like how I think when you're a cartoonist, you kind of build your like visual library of stuff that you can pull from. And I think I'm at the point where I can like look at anything and know how I would draw a cartoon version of it right away. Even though that sounds stupid, but it's like drawing cars is really hard. But I know how to draw a car now. So if you ever look at in any of my books, I think definitely Con Artists and Self-Esteem, like the car interiors of cars are all of this exact same angle from the exact same thing, and you just see every character's in the same car. Because why learn? Why grow?
Yeah. Yeah.
Same.
I mean, should you end up, I mean, just like Google image searching what interior car looks like and referencing from there?
Yeah. And then I'll trace it 500 times for
Yeah.
my career.
I'm not going to ask about too many specific pages because people here have mostly probably not read it. But on page 131, there's a big storm, and you have a dog in the storm, and I don't know if it is specifically referencing Goya's black paintings.
No.
It made me think of it specifically. Okay, well, anyway, I guess
very
I'm off
sorry.
then. Anyway, if anyone is familiar with Goya, a Spanish painter, has a series of very dark, late in his career paintings called the Black Paintings, which includes the, I don't know, Saturn eating the kid thing. Anyway, one of the other ones is a dog drowning in the ocean,
Oh,
and it made me
okay.
think of this.
I wanted to do the dog drowning because I really hate that book Save the Cat, which I know is annoying, an annoying opinion to have, but I don't like writing advice typically, which I think like if it works for you, that's great. But I think I hate like 3-act structure and all that kind of thing. And if for people who don't know that it's like a famous screenwriting book where the Blake Snyder who wrote it basically says that at the start of a movie, your character should have like their save the cat moment, which is where they do something nice that shows the audience that they're a good person. And in this, I thought it would be quite funny if the two like main characters let a dog drown without doing anything. So sorry, spoilers, the dog drowns. No.
Okay, I think the dog ends up okay.
Yeah, the dog's fine. There's a reveal. There's
I
a
don't want to
late
drop
stage
sales of
reveal.
your book.
Yeah. Don't be sad.
So as this is a Solas Nua program and the kind of focus of a lot of the stuff here is Irish culture, would you say that there's anything particularly Irish about the way that you do your comics?
I think I wouldn't say I'm like influenced by like other Irish comics specifically because there's not a huge history of that. There's some, but not too many. But I think like growing up in Ireland like definitely has affected how I write. I think in a lot of ways, like in my book, I mean, people might be wondering like, why do I sound so American if I'm Irish? And I grew up in Ireland until I was 21, I think. Yeah, I was 21 when I moved to Vermont for school. But I grew up like so obsessed with American media, because I think a lot of people of my generation in Ireland did that. That it's been kind of adult now to go back and like rediscover like my Irishness, I guess. Like I live in London mostly, but I just spent 6 months of this year living in Ireland back with my parents, spending time with my parents. And I think the older I get, the more I have such an appreciation for Ireland, and particularly Irish sense of humor, which is like, and people always say that, like, oh, Irish people have the gift of the gab or whatever. I was such a shy boy that I didn't feel like I had the gift of the gab. But I think there's such a rich history of like Irish like satire that is really great. Like, I mean, Oscar Wilde is so famous, you know. But yeah, definitely, I think like my humor. I think in a lot of my works, like they're about really like dark, sad things, but I think they're treated with like a kind of stoicism and lightness that I think is very Irish. It's very like don't complain, like push it all down. And so I'm like having characters who like push it down, like have it explode out.
Yeah.
You know.
But there's a lot of pushing down, but also a big part of this kind of feels like a love letter to your mom in some ways.
Yeah.
Because even though bad stuff happens in the story to you, that she as a supporting character is always pretty much there for you the whole time, even when you disagree.
Yeah. Yeah, I love my mom. She's cool. Their relationship in the book is very much like how she and I actually talk, which is we like kind of give each other a hard time, but we all know it's like in good fun, I guess. And I definitely get my like I'm an anxious worrier, and a lot of the book is about anxiety, and I got that from her. She's like a real worrier, which I think maybe a lot of like mothers are for their kids. It's like normal to worry about your kids. But yeah, she's cool. What was the question? I love my mom.
All right, I just wanted you to talk about your mom for a little bit.
Yeah, she's but she's a really amazing person, and I kind of not, like I don't want to be like a mama's boy, but she's a kind of person who the way that she surrounds herself with people is like the way that I hope that I could in my life ever do that. She's very generous and cool, and I tried so hard to be like her, basically.
Oh,
I feel like I'm, yeah, I don't know.
that's very sweet.
This is for you, Mom. Thank you.
I also, I mean, you mentioned Oscar Wilde, queer art icon. Your books are deeply queer, but in most of the time, it's not like the focal point of the story.
Yeah.
They're not. This isn't a romance comic or anything. But I've always really appreciated the way that you are able to depict your queerness or the queerness of your characters in a way that feels real.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk about, I mean, are you making conscious decisions when you're deciding how you're going to depict your characters when it
Yeah.
comes to that?
Well, I think like at first, I didn't realize I was gay or come out until like I was like in my late 20s basically. And I think a lot, so it's in my early work, it's like very subtextual, but like even to me, it's like I read them now, I'm like, oh my God, like, how did you not know, you idiot? But I think like it's sort of like it makes me happy inside because a lot of people say that to me about my comics, how they like how I write queer characters because they're not like I think it's sad to me because like my books don't get put with like queer literature because there's just gay people in them like acting like people basically. But I think that every single human on earth is like exactly the same. Which is like maybe a weird thing to say, but people sometimes ask like, oh, how do you write this kind of character, whatever. I'm like, I just write everyone to act like me because I think everyone is exactly like me because we're all exactly the same. Like we all want the same things. We all just want to be like fed and safe and warm and like to have friends. And so all of my characters just want to be like warm and have friends, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you talk about that you feel like you're an anxious person, and that's what this book is about, but so much of it feels like things that me and people in my life think about all the time. It feels very universal.
Oh, cool.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah, I think everybody just is boring, basically. Like a big part of the book, like, you know, when I was a teenager, like in my early 20s, like I think a lot of people, I thought that getting older would be something that was like kind of like exciting, like your life is going to change in all these ways and you're going to discover these new like freedoms and explore the world and all this sort of stuff. And I'm very privileged that I've got to do a lot of like really cool, exciting stuff, but mostly getting older and like most of people's lives is like very mundane, I think, really. And I think that's sort of reflected in the book. Like, you know, there's like kind of a few splashy things that happen, but mostly like, you know, one of the chapters takes place at like a corporate retreat where people are like learning how to be like insurance salespeople, you know? And I think the older I get, the more I'm just like kind of glad that like life's pretty mundane.
I mean,
some of
my favorite comics of yours over the last couple of years are when you did a few comics about stuff that you were going through with your landlord.
Oh my God, yeah, he was awful. Not to I say I'm like anti all landlords, but he made me pretty close. Like he was a really not nice guy.
Yeah. Well, I guess we've been talking for a while. Should we give it over to the audience if anyone's got any questions?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, raise your hand and I will come around with a microphone.
No pressure. Ooh, one over in the back here.
Hi, my question was, do you typically draw something first and then the story kind of comes to you? Or do you think about your story first and then kind of draw based on that? Or does it happen at the same time?
It happens at the same time mostly. Thank you for your question. Right. It happens mostly at the same time. The way that I like make my comics, I guess I would call that part of the process writing, but I always work in a grid, like a 6-panel grid. So I made a rubber stamp where I can just like stamp on notebook pages to get six squares. And I plan everything together. Like I'm probably very annoying to edit because I like write a first draft of something all the way through and then I like refuse to change it. It's like it's fine. Like I don't need to change anything. But as I do it, I'm like, I do it. One of the reasons I do that is because it's like a little stamp and it makes like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter squares. And so it means that I can't put too much in any panel. So like only a couple of words and then like a little small tiny stick man figure.
So that's you thumbnailing the whole thing that way?
Yeah. And so I usually, when I'm working on a book, I'll do the whole thing all the way through like that. It's just like stick figures. And then, I mean, I was being a little bit facetious. Like I'll make some edits, but only if they're good. Only if they're right. But yeah, so it's really like a kind of simultaneous thing. And if anybody is ever interested in making comics, like that is my number one tip is like write them into a grid. Even if you don't draw them, like have a grid and write the words in because that'll stop you from putting like an essay into one of the panels, which you see a lot from first time cartoonists. Yeah.
Hi, I'm curious about the what you said about the con artists, which I've already read, and I guess my question is, like you said, well, everything's true except,
Mm.
so again, spoiler alert, I guess it's not that much of a spoiler, but in the book, the other person, the other main character besides yourself or your
Mm.
character is a friend.
Yeah.
And he's, you know, Italian, he's got Italian parents but he's Irish and blah, blah, blah. So, but in reality, you said that this was your brother.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, how do you decide like how much and what to fictionalize and maybe why? I mean, I guess I can understand it with your familial
Yeah.
situation, but like what caused you to like how much fictionalizing did you think was necessary? How did you decide what to choose to fictionalize? Where did the Italian parents, et cetera, come from? I'm just curious about that. Like, you know.
Yeah. So the reason he's Italian is because he's called Giorgio, and my brother works in fashion, so I named him after Giorgio Armani. But yeah, and then he's kind of like Italian only in like in name. There's nothing like too Italian about that character. But I think the major things that I've changed are the one of the big ones is just like kind of deleting people like who maybe were at events, but you just can't have like 20 characters in a book. So it makes sense to just have it focus on like 2 or 3 or. And so, maybe I can't think of specific examples from the con artists, like, or there's a part in the con artists where the Giorgio character comes to like a comedy show that the Frank character is performing at. And in reality, like my mother actually was there with my brother, but I was like, if we just add that, it's just too much to like deal with that. So I kind of like cut that out. So the major changes that I made in that book were just like removing things mostly. And then I did a couple things to disguise his identity. And then also, there's a scene where the Frank character who is me gets like punched in the face, and that happened on a different night. And it was really random. A guy just walked up to me in the street and punched me in the face, right outside my house, actually. And so I thought that would just be an interesting moment to felt like it happened while I was writing the book. I was like, I should put that in the book. Yeah, but it sucked.
All right, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, so the fact that you went to comic design school in Vermont, do you then, when you see other comic artists, are you able to say, oh, they're classically trained, like a ballet dancer, and you can tell, like, is this somebody who just dances or someone who's has a classical ballet background? So do you see the same in sort of graphic designers, comic
Interesting.
artists?
That is a great question. I think I can usually clock when someone went to the same school that I went to, because because we all go through the same assignments. So there's not a house style really, but there's kind of a few sensibilities that people tend to share who went to that school. You probably read stuff by other cartoon studies people. Do you get, there's like a vibe about them? Yeah, there's like a vibe. But more broadly, not really. I think comics is a very like DIY kind of like medium, and a lot of people come to it just as fans, and then like self teach. And there's lots of great resources that people can find to learn more. But yeah, from my specific school, I can always tell. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really intrigued by the intersection or the connection, if any, between your improv stand-up and the cartoon process that you described, which seems much more based on the written word, or at least a word verbal rather than visual design and movement.
Yeah, I think a lot about how they're similar, actually, because I think in stand-up particularly, the word of the day, the like most important thing about stand-up is brevity. Like brevity is the soul of wit and all that. But it's true, like in stand-up, you want to get the maximum impact while saying as little as possible. Like things just play a lot better. And so it's all about shaving things down to their like essential ideas.
You put that in your bio.
Oh, really?
Luke enjoys comedy and brevity.
Yeah, there you go. How witty of me. But I think comics is the same. Like people, there's like I don't know who said it, but there's like a quote about comics that it's the art of reduction. because it is all about simplifying things, like from a visual standpoint, but also, you know, you can fit so little in a comic. You have to be extremely economical in order to make it feel like full. You know, you have to, because if you focus too much on one, like you could write a scene of comics that takes up 300 pages.
You just talked about simplifying for the con artists and cutting characters down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just, yeah, they're both all about just like trimming things to their, trimming all the fat off everything. And then also a big part of comics is timing. Because you control the flow of time in comics by the division of panels in space. And in stand-up and improv, it's all about timing as well. So choosing what to like hold on to and like when to like let that punchline out or to have that reveal. Like a little like comics thing that people do is like, you know, you can't ever have a big dramatic reveal on a right-hand page, because when the person turns the page, they'll see it before they get to it, because they have to read the left-hand page first. So everything has to be on the left. That's exciting. And so there's just little things like that, that to me, that's exactly like stand-up, where like, you know, your punchline, it should be the last word that you say is like the funny part, the reveal. So I think it's, yeah, they have like a lot of similarities actually.
All right, we're gonna do one more question and then we're gonna wrap up here.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I know we're almost out of
Oh,
time,
thank you.
but I had two quick questions. First, thank you for being here. But my first question was, you kind of used comic books as like a way to deal with getting older. So what advice do you have for like young people kind of finding an outlet for that? And then my second question is that you said films weren't really an influence, but TV shows were. So I was curious, what TV shows? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, those are both great questions. My advice to anyone who is younger than me is relax. Like, please relax. Like, if I could tell that to myself 10 years ago, I think I would have been a lot happier. And just, yeah, like, nothing's as big a deal as you think it is. And I try to tell myself that all the time. Like during, like I said, during COVID, like, I had a really rough time. Like, things were really bad. But I just kept saying the whole time, like, this is fine though. Like, it's really terrible, but when I look back on it, it'll probably be fine. And yeah, so I think just chill out. No, I don't know. But that is what I would tell myself anyway. And I think it might help other people. The TV shows that are like, well, Gilmore Girls is a really big one. I love that show. I love the way that the creator of that show writes. But like stage sitcoms are a really big one for me, like Friends and Frasier and that kind of a thing. Because what I love about them again is like they have that brevity, like it's all really, really trimmed down, but also they're so invested in like simple characters, which I think is really important in comics. Like, you know, there even a character like a book like this, which is basically kind of like a character study, like the main character is in every panel of the whole book, like it's just about him. Like you really, really have to like simplify down what you're trying to say with a character in comics, because you just don't have like it's, you know, I joked about Dostoevsky earlier, but like it's not Crime and Punishment. Like you don't have 700 pages to like really like dig into it. And so like, you know, something like Friends, which I watched a lot of growing up, which I think I really like Friends. Which is why I said so American, is because I like wanted to be like Chandler when I was growing up. It's like a terrible life choice.
Hey, at least it wasn't Ross.
Hey, thank you. And I'm grateful. Although I love David Schwimmer. But anyway, like, you know, in that show, like so much of the comedy of that show boils down to each character's like simple point of view, which is that Chandler will always be insecure. Joey will always be confident. Monica will always be anxious. You know, like Ross is like controlling basically, but he's you know, like he's paranoid. You know, they all have that like one thing at the core of them.
And there's only like 3 settings that the whole show takes place in.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's so like when you look at an episode of that, I've done some sitcom writing. When you look at an episode of something like Friends, like so little gets to happen in an episode. Basically every storyline gets 3 scenes. The one where it's set up, the one where there's some kind of complication, and then when it gets resolved. And, you know, like they'll pair off Joey and Phoebe and we'll see them 3 times over the course of 22 minutes. And just having that like real simple clarity of character is something that I try to do, even though I'm not doing like explicit, like hard joke sitcom stuff. Yeah, just like really simple, and the stupider the better, in my opinion. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you both. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Luke. Luke will be signing books and after this upstairs at a table. So feel free to get your copy of The Con Artist signed. And if you're interested in self-esteem and the end of the world, we'll have a few copies up there as well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.